Hello, welcome to Insights from an Autistic. I'm Imran Kodai. I'm 26 years old and on the autism spectrum. As I've mentioned in my blog and in my other videos recently, I got a new job which has been eating up my time for making my videos. At the beginning of this year, one of my number one goals was to get on my case about getting YouTube videos and blogs up every 2 or 3 days. Now it looks like it's going to be every 4 or 5 days. But they will come, they will come. So someone asked me to talk about what my new job was and how that affects me, all that type of stuff. First of all, I'm going to say that to the end because I want to give you a history of the various employments I had and how that has shaped me to who I am today, and my opinion overall about employment and why I sought it out a new job in the first place. So the very first job I had was actually a tutoring job. And that was while I was going to school, while I was going to community college. My mom said, Armand, you have to get a job, just so you have some real world experience. That was actually a very bad idea. I only worked at most 3 hours a day, but those 3 hours really drained me because those were 3 hours taken away from my studies, and it was just very tiring to me because I was working, really putting so much energy into working with the kids that I was tutoring. And I was working with elementary school kids. And so it was very draining, and it really took away from a lot of homework. Up into that semester, I had a 3.8 GPA. That semester, I had 2 Ds. That was a very bad semester. And so I was actually really overextending myself. I have a very hard time multitasking. Like if my focus is school, I can only really focus on school. If my focus is writing, I can really only focus on writing. If my focus is on a job, I can really only focus on a job. It is very hard for me to do a lot of different things, and so that's another reason why I haven't done these videos, just because it's very hard for me to go from one mode to the next. So because now with my job, it's very hard for me to get into YouTube video mode again or blog mode again. So that's one autistic characteristic that I'm still working on overcoming, learning to multitask and learning. And it's not just multitasking like at one time, it's actually multitasking within a day. Like if I'm in work mode, I'm like in work mode for the entire day. So it's really challenging to change out of those different modes. And in 2005, it was a very hard year for me. I had 2 different jobs that year, and I think I made a lot of good decisions that year. My parents got divorced that year. A lot of crap was going on. 2005 is the absolute worst year ever in my life. It's the only year where I have parts of my memory missing. I wrote my memoir. I was actually, I've been writing my memoir for a few years now, and when I got to that part, about my parents divorcing, so there were so many details I couldn't remember. I can remember a lot of different things. I can remember my early childhood, which some people have read in my book, which it isn't released yet, but I've had some people read it in advance, and those people have read it. They're like, "Wow, you remember a lot about your childhood," and they're kind of surprised by that. Yet the divorce and a lot of things in that year, just a lot of it has been escaped my mind. But anyway, I worked for the Home Depot for 4 months, and my mom begged me not to quit. And years later, she still was upset at me for quitting. It was a very good decision on my part to quit, though. And it was really hard for me. I had so much anxiety working there. I think that was one of the most intense anxiety experiences I've ever had in my life. I was put into the tool rental department, and no one really explained the tools or how they worked and all these different types of things. So sometimes I'd be the only one there, and customers would be like, "How do you work this?" And I'd have no idea myself. And then I get in trouble because I didn't know. And I also got in trouble because they would ask me to park a truck, but I didn't have a driver's license and I didn't know how to drive, so I would never park the truck. And there was just a lot of things going on, and a lot of things made me uncomfortable. Like some of the coworkers talked about subjects that just made me uncomfortable. And I was just so uncomfortable, so much anxiety in that job. And then I also ended up hurting my back because I did go through a safety class through the training, but I wasn't aware that there was something there that could help me get these really heavy objects off the shelves. And when I say heavy, some of them weighed 100 pounds, literally, because these are like really like heavy tools, like jackhammers and things like that. And the jackhammers weren't even the heaviest things. So trying to carry some of these things, well, I ended up injuring my back. I didn't tell anyone because I was so afraid of getting fired or making a deal out of it, and I was afraid of what the repercussions could be of that. So I never told anyone about injuring my back as a result of that. So a lot of bad things. I quit after 4 months. And then I worked for UPS, and that was actually good because UPS was structured. They told me exactly what to do, and I just loaded up the boxes into the really big loader trucks, the really big ones. And I was pretty good at that. And if I would have stayed with them, I'd probably be making a decent amount of money, at least $20 an hour. But it was just really exhausting and physical labor, and it just wasn't the right fit for me overall. I think though that UPS could be a good job for a lot of people in the autism spectrum though. So, and it would have been a decent job, but I was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So I quit. But I enjoyed it a zillion times more than working at the Home Depot. And then I ended up getting a tutoring job again because that was something I knew how to do. So I worked in that. The one problem was that I had to drive, go too far. Actually, I didn't drive, and I had to go super far, and it just wasn't working out for me. So I ended up getting another tutoring job, and this one was better. But in the end, I was again driving too far. And actually, towards the end of it, there was just a lot of wrongdoings in the company going on that I didn't agree with, and that wasn't good for me. So I ended up quitting and ended up going to yet again another tutoring company. And this was in 2008, probably the second worst year of my life, but also one of the best years because that was the very first and only time actually that I've been in love. But I ended up going to this tutoring company because I was looking for a new job, and at first this guy didn't have a job for me, but he wanted me to come back and help him and stuff. So I'd come back, and he was just this guy had issues. My employer, to say the least, he was very clingy, and so he begged me to keep coming back, and eventually he convinced me to working for him. And when I was working for him, it was really awful. I was making $100 a month. He couldn't get me hours. Sometimes he couldn't pay me on time. And financially, he just didn't know how to balance things, and he was very clingy. I felt that there weren't boundaries that there should have been. And for some reason, I stuck with that company for a long time. A lot of it had to do with that at the time, my ex broke up with me. We didn't divorce. We weren't ever married or anything like that. But it felt like a divorce because I was deeply in love with her. But it was like a very, very bad breakup for me. But like I said, we weren't even engaged or anything. We're actually only together for 6 months. But still, a very bad experience. And so because of that, I was just so depressed that I couldn't get off my feet. I couldn't go and look for another job. For over a year, I think almost 2 years, I was making $100 a month. It was awful. How do you survive off $100 a month? And finally, I just quit. I didn't know how to make money. My mom was very pissed off at me about that, but I'm like, Mom, this isn't working for me. The moment I quit, I became self-employed, and I started to write online articles, and I started to promote myself a little bit more for speaking engagements. At that time, I was making $200 to $500 a month. More around the $200, but at least I was making more money than when I was working for him. So it was actually much better for me. And so I was happier. I had control over what I would do, and it was actually a very good period. But then I'm like, okay, I want to start my nonprofit, which happened, a couple months ago. I'm like, okay, I'm starting a nonprofit. Then I realized I have to pay for liability insurance, overhead costs, etc., etc., etc. And while I know that I will be able to get some money through fundraising and grants and things like that, there's a lot of upfront costs that I have to have. And I've raised some money to pay for some of it, but it's not enough. So I realized that if I want to get my nonprofit started, I have to bring in more money. So that brings us up to now. So I'm actually working so that I can work. Actually, I was working already. So aside from working, even though I'm making $200 to $500 a month, I was, doing my blog and YouTube videos almost every single day. And I've been running my groups. And running my groups alone, calling up the people, sometimes doing activities, that took up a good 20 hours, and another, 20 hours or so doing YouTubes and blogs and answering emails that I would get. So that was a full-time job, 20 and 20, that's like 40 hours. So that already has been a full-time job. Some weeks would be, some weeks would not be as bad. Some weeks I'd only put in 20 hours of work, but still. And I'm not, really making much money off it. Most of the money I make off of it would be like, getting a speaking engagement here and there. So, I in my opinion, I was employed. I was working. I was working, but I wasn't really getting paid for that employment. But I'm still pretty satisfied. And I just tell myself, okay, I'm going to make money eventually. Doing what I'm doing, and in the long run, because this is a passion of mine. So that's why I'm turning into a nonprofit. But then I'm like realizing as a nonprofit that I really have to up my game and really bring in some money. So now I got another job, or I have a job now that isn't self-employed. In some ways it's very draining on me. And what's my job again? Well, it's a tutoring job because it's what I'm familiar with. It is actually very draining on me, and it takes up a lot of mental energy, and it's actually taken away from some things, actually. Because the unfortunate thing about this one job, it's not like where you're working at a tutoring clinic. I'm going home to home, and I have to, for the company I'm working for, I have to prepare all my materials in advance, and I don't get paid for that, and I don't get paid for the gas mileage, and a lot of things I don't get paid for that I think I should get paid for. So I have to prepare for it in advance, and I have to do a zillion pieces of paperwork. And a lot of it, then for every paperwork I have to do, I also have to enter it on a computer. And so every hour of tutoring that I do is actually 2 hours. I mean, every hour that I can pay for, it's really 2 hours of work. Between the paperwork, entering things on the computer, it really does add up to about 2 hours of work. I'm not even kidding. And then I have to pay for my own paper, my own printing for the papers, and I printed off about 100 pages of paper for the first 2 weeks for materials and everything. So over time, that adds up, because ink, isn't cheap. So there's the good and the bad. The good thing is I am bringing in some money, and although the amount I'm bringing in is not substantial, but it's going to be enough. It's more than the $200 to $500 a month that I was making beforehand. And so with this, I'll be able to get my nonprofit off the ground and really get things going. And so that's the number one reason why I'm doing it. But it is, there are good and bad things. Like I said, the bad thing is it really is draining me sometimes, and it's taking away from what I want to do, which is work on my nonprofit. So there's that to take into consideration. So it's kind of like a catch-22, I guess, or whatever. But so that is an update. That is an update on my whole employment thing, and so there's challenges and things that go with that. But I think in the long run that it will be beneficial. And the moral of the story I want to get to, I now get why, like, a lot of women might stay with a guy that they don't like but who has money, and it's the reason why people stay in a job that they don't like. And it's like if the person has money, it's a security thing, and you're afraid of taking a chance. And it's the same thing with a job. If you're not satisfied, you're afraid that you won't be able to, you might find something worse, or you won't be able to do any better. And at one point I did take that leap of faith, quitting my job. Of course, it was $100 a month. but you know, it was ended up being very good for me, even though I was only still making $200 to $500 a month, which is terrible, but still, I was much more emotional. I was in a much more emotional, better place as a result of that. And quitting the Home Depot was a very good thing for me too. All these jobs I quit, quitting the Home Depot, quitting that job, you know, it made my mom very upset. But I know that both those decisions were the right decisions because mentally, emotionally, it was crushing me. And so if you're in a job that is really unsatisfactory, you are really compromising yourself, and it's not good for you. And you need to get out of that. But I mean, maybe you've never had a job before, and you're looking for a job. You know, it's good, you know, to get you know, to gain some experience. And it's also important to realize when you've gained that experience and you need to start looking elsewhere. And sometimes you need to quit before you're looking elsewhere. Or, I mean, you need to, you know, depending on how bad things are, sometimes you need to start looking. But, you know, sometimes it's hard to do that when you're employed. So, you know, sometimes you need to take a chance. But what I'm saying is that money's important to have this for survival. But you also have to think about your emotional and mental health as well. So, I thank you for watching today's video, and I wish everyone an awesome day of awesomeness. Thank you.